Despite watching this film nearly a month ago, I just finally got around to making this review. The hype surrounding this film was incredibly high, especially due to the good reviews it was getting from critics and the intense marketing campaign that saw the Batman appear on everything from action figures to pajamas. And while the film itself wasn't exactly the stunning spectacle that was being hyped up by many, it was still a satisfactory film nevertheless. Before I start this review, I'm still genuinely confused as to why some people were comparing this film to The Dark Knight, because this film isn't even on that one's level. I'll even go a step further to say that it doesn't even compare to Batman vs Superman, the Ultimate Edition of course. If anything, it should be compared to Batman Begins or The Dark Knight Rises, but then again, Spider-Man 2 and The Dark Knight are both the greatest superhero movies of all time, one being the best lighthearted superhero film and the other being the best gritty and dark one. So naturally, any film starring the same character is going to birth comparisons between the respective films, as No Way Home was initially being compared to Spider-Man 2. As I did with my review of No Way Home, I'll start off by highlighting what I didn't like about this film before diverging off to what I enjoyed about this film, because believe me, there's a lot wrong with this film. For one, for years it has been a staple of the industry for the main superhero to get into the shape of his life before taking on the role, as if we're going to be seeing someone with performing unsurmountable acts of strength, then they should at least try and look the part. With Robert Pattinson, that sadly wasn't the case. While he wasn't out of shape by any means, not at all, he wasn't in prime condition either, and it's a bit immersion breaking when one of the only superheroes without powers isn't even rocking a six-pack. But then again, who even cares about that? Moving on, the fight choreography in The Batman was incredibly underwhelming. While it was still a monumental step up from the fighting in the Nolan trilogy that was riddled with cuts, it was still a massive step down from the fighting of Snyder's Batman that truly revolutionized the way Batman fought. As time goes on, we should be expecting Batman's fighting to progress rather than regress. Criminals who should have been beaten into a pulp look barely scathed. Batman is far too overpowered in the sense that you never really feel like he's in any danger, and the fighting arenas are all too compacted. There's never any opportunity to display flamboyance that we want to see in comic book movie fights. Another aspect of the film that underwhelmed me was the film's score. Rather than hear a memorable score full of the zest of Gotham City and its dynamic characters, we literally just get the same four notes we got at the end of the trailer, again and again and again and again and again. It isn't all bad though, because the Batman's theme is still pretty good in capturing the essence of the character. It's just that there isn't much else auditory stimulus for our ears to enjoy. I also didn't like how Robert Pattinson wasn't able to truly exhibit his abilities as an actor. Don't get me wrong, I loved his Batman voice, and he handled the character well. However, truth be told, anyone can look cool while brooding in a Batman suit. The Batman part of the character is almost all the director. Reeves was the one who set up the script, lighting, and camera angles. It's the secret identity part where an actor can really strut his stuff, and despite the film being a whopping 3 hours, we rarely see Pattinson as Bruce Wayne. And even when he is Bruce Wayne, he isn't given much to do other than brood around, just as though he was in the costume. I understand that this was the point that Reeves was trying to make, that the Batman persona had consumed Wayne's life to the extent that it became his sole purpose, but Batman vs Superman achieved the same thing, but even then Bruce Wayne had his rich idiot with no day job persona that he used when forced to go out in public. This Batman is said to be only in his second year, so I guess we can give him a pass, but I sincerely hope that this problem is fixed if they make a sequel. Now, let's get to the rest of the characters that make up Director Reeves' Batverse. To start off, I really didn't like Andy Serkis in the role of Alfred. Don't get me wrong, I'm a fan of Serkis in most of his roles, such as Gollum, Captain Haddock, and Ulysses Klaue, to name a few, but over here he was a lot more whiny than he was wise or even charming, and there was this one exchange between him and Bruce where he talks about Bruce having to preserve the Wayne name, which is copied nearly line by line from Alfred and Bruce's exchange in Batman Begins. We didn't see too much of him either, and I don't know if this is due to scheduling restraints with Serkis or what, but that was the reason why it barely got a reaction out of me when it was revealed that the Riddler had bombed him. He didn't really have much to do in this film other than argue with Bruce and say, "Your father was a good man." That subplot in particular was horrendously handled by Reeves. When it was first revealed that the Waynes had insanity in their family and that Thomas Wayne had hired someone to assassinate the Riddler's father who was investigating the situation, I thought that it was pure genius. Batman's parents were finally taken off their pedestal, Bruce was having an identity crisis, and the Riddler was linked back to Bruce Wayne all at once. However, they just had to smash it all up with the plot twist that it was actually Falcone who acted on his own and that Thomas Wayne hadn't wanted the journalist to be murdered. Yep, never mind, the Waynes are infallible, they can do no wrong. And for those who claim that it would completely undermine Bruce's motivation for being the Batman, you're wrong. Bruce Wayne became the Batman in order to prevent as many people as he can from experiencing the same loss and pain that he did after his parents were murdered in the gutter. The Waynes being flawless had nothing to do with the trauma and pain Bruce experienced as a result of their deaths. Switching over to Catwoman, although Zoe Kravitz is still a much better casting choice for Catwoman than Anne Hathaway, she still didn't tickle my fancy too much in the role. A lot of time is dedicated to her character, but she still ends up feeling like the cliche rogue mysterious beauty trope. And the fight scenes that feature her are even more zany and unbelievable than Batman's, and while I appreciated the relevancy and political undertones of the film overall, it was enough at that, as Catwoman's explicit mention of the controversial issue of white privilege was incredibly immersion-breaking, and ironic in the sense that Zoe Kravitz is half white herself. The Riddler, while definitely being a fairly menacing and bright spot of this film, still couldn't attain greatness. While Paul Dano did indeed excel in the role, his iteration of the Riddler still severely lacked originality. Director Matt Reeves' vision for the Riddler was definitely inspired by Todd Phillips' Joker, and it really shows, right down to the Riddler's connection to the Waynes. When you think about it, Reeves' Riddler is nothing more than Phillips' Joker with a sophisticated and controlled plan for chaos rather than a spontaneous and disorganized one. I mean, hell, Reeves even juxtaposes the Riddler with the Joker at the end of the film to show just how similar they are. The Riddler himself in this film could have been one of the greatest cinematic villains of all time, but it's the endgame of his plan that really ruins it for me. What it does is that it changes the Riddler from being a sympathizable anti-hero targeting the corrupt into a cliche villain trope at the end when he suddenly decides to flood the city, completely unraveling his nuance as a character. Speaking of flooding the city, I admired how this film was brave enough to have Batman fail in stopping the Riddler's plan. However, that is then seemingly glossed over with Batman weirdly ignoring the fact that he lost. I won't really hold that against the film because it's easily fixable in the sequel, but speaking of the final internal monologue, why the hell did they turn Batman into some sort of Superman figure? The Batman is definitely not a beacon of hope. I mean, he is for the innocent, but he feeds off of the fear and terror he inspires in his foes. I don't know, the whole beacon of hope line really ruined the ending for me. It just didn't feel like Batman. Now, on to the good stuff. When Robert Pattinson was initially cast as Batman, I was one of the biggest haters of him out there. While I haven't watched the Twilight films, I've seen him act in films like The Lighthouse, where he was nothing too special. I just felt that he didn't have the look or voice for the role, and he proved me completely wrong here, I must admit. He proved to be a great brooding Batman, and his voice was spot on here. His suit was also pretty epic, apart from the cowl. It looks like he's wearing a robe from the back. And his utilization of gadgets was just pure Batman, and while he wasn't Bruce Wayne for very long in this film, when he was, he did well in portraying him as a more depressed, emo, if you will, version of the character. Much like it was the case with the three Spider-Men, with Tobey Maguire being the best Peter Parker by far, Andrew Garfield the better Spider-Man, and Tom Holland simply being good at both, I feel that the same can also be said with Christian Bale, Ben Affleck, and Robert Pattinson in the same order. The action sequences in this film are wonderfully shot, and the cinematography overall is simply delightful, which is why I honestly regret not having seen this film in IMAX. I heard a lot of people complain about the film's final third, but that wasn't the case with me at all. The beginning and end of this film that I enjoyed the least, nearly everything else in between was good. While the film does drag on a little at times at its whopping 3-hour runtime, I mean, the dude sitting next to me literally fell asleep for 20 minutes. Almost none of it is pointless exposition, unlike The Dark Knight Rises, for example, and it was all crucial to understanding the story and how Riddler's plan would develop. Many have already praised the film for finally embracing Batman's detective side to a larger extent, and I'll have to jump right onto that bandwagon as it made up large chunks of the film without becoming a bore, which is truly a feat in and of itself. Many of my criticisms of this film can be easily nullified with a well-written sequel featuring some character development, so let's wait and see for what Reeves has in store for us next with his upcoming take on the Joker, which, I gotta be honest, looks pretty bad. I mean, look at that face, there's a reason this scene was cut. I give this film overall a 3 out of 5 stars. While it doesn't boast a very thought-provoking story, it remains visually stunning and well acted.